And now for something completely different. As they say in all the best sketch programs. Now, perhaps this is not completely different, but it is different in the sense that I had some assistance in the composition of these pieces. And that was from an algorithmic composition program called M. Now, in this video, I will explain a little bit about M and how it works, and I will give you examples of, I think, 5 pieces of music which I composed, or it composed, or we composed together. I will just give you short extracts in this video, but links to the entire pieces will be in the description below. Most of them are not very long. Now, these pieces were on my Rediscovered Tapes, which is how I came to rediscover them, but more of that in a moment. When I was researching this video, I thought it would be a good idea to include a little bit about computer composition in general, the different styles and types and the state of the art, how much it's progressed. But I got lost for days researching this subject. It's absolutely fascinating. There's tons and tons of material out there. So I thought, in order to keep this video to under 4 or 5 hours at least, I thought I would just concentrate on M and the algorithmic composition process and the pieces that it produced. Now, I have been interested in computer composition since forever. This is my first book, published in 1984, making music on the BBC computer. And I'm not plugging it, it must be out of print now, and who has a BBC any longer? But the point is, back in the mid-80s, when home computers became a reality, I was really interested in how they could be used to generate music, and there are 2 chapters in this book about computer compositions. I wrote a lot of programs in BBC Basic, that's BASIC, which stands for Beginners All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, and it's a relatively easy programming language which all home computers had. So I wrote a lot of programs in BBC Basic and put them in the book. And there are 2 chapters which I devoted to computer compositions. One of the great things about computers is their ability to analyze data. Another is the ability to follow a set of rules, essentially what we would call a program. But a program is simply a set of algorithmic instructions designed to carry out a particular task. So with one of the programs, you could enter a set of simple instructions, a set of algorithms, which the computer would follow to produce a line of music. So a set of rules might be something like only select notes from the key of C. You must start and end on a C. If you generate a B, that must be followed by a C. This was set up to generate music in complete bars, so one of the rules was to generate durations which added up to a complete bar. And you could add more rules if you wanted. Anyway, so that was an example of a very simple algorithmic composition program. Another program analysed a series of notes and generated music based on note probabilities. So this was all good fun back in 1984, and to the best of my knowledge there'd never been any attempt to do anything like this on a home computer before. I do believe in academia, which had access to the big computers which filled the room. People had been working on programs to write music in the style of Bach, for example. So in 1987, a company called Intelligent Music released a piece of software called M. Now, this was initially available for the Atari ST, the Commodore Amiga, and for Mac and PC. Now, I don't know what happened to Intelligent Music, but M is still alive and well under the auspices of Cycling 74. Now, if you haven't heard of Cycling 74, they are a company which specialises in the development of music for the Apple Mac. Probably their flagship program is a piece of software called Max, which is a visual music composition language. And back in the late 80s, early 90s, I reviewed this. It was very, very powerful. Although being a program language, it still took a while to get into it. But that is still going. If you haven't heard of Max, you may well have heard of Max for Live, which is a series of plugins for Ableton Live, which I believe is the most popular DAW in the world. So Cycling 74 took over the development of M, and it is still available, although alas only for the Apple Mac. But it has been updated, and it does apparently have a large band of dedicated followers. Now, I'm not going into a massive amount of detail about M. It is quite a complex and intricate program. There is a link to it on Cycling 74's website in the description. If you want to try it, there is a demo mode which disables saving. You can also download the manual free of charge. As I said, it's a little bit involved. The manual is 194 pages long, but it's well written, so don't let that put you off. But you will have to read it to get the most out of it. Now, I remember when I reviewed this, probably back in 1987, 1988, it took me a good couple of days at least to get into it and to discover all the features. Essentially, you enter a series of notes and chords and durations and patterns and so on, and then the software manipulates them and comes up with probably something completely different, but based on the material that you enter, of course. Now, one of the interesting things is that it was actually designed as a performance instrument. So, having entered your raw material, you can then adjust the parameters on the fly, and it will change as it is playing back the music. And that is exactly what I did on some of these pieces. So before we get into the pieces, I'll just give you a little look at the screens and explain a little bit about what they do. As I said, not a massive amount of detail. These screenshots were taken from the manual, so they may not be the highest definition, but they will at least give you a flavour of the program and how it works and what it can do. So this is the pattern editor, one of the main screens you would be working in. It's used to record notes that the program will use. You can see that it has a key editor, a piano roll type editor in the center, and on the right there are a lot of numeric parameters. Now, it might look a little bit complicated, but once you know what the parameters are and how they work and what they do, it is not perhaps quite as complicated as it might seem. And here is the cyclic editor, which you would use to create rhythms and to set up accents and so on. There are 4 sections because M handles 4 voices or 4 channels, so it's only a quarter as complicated as it might look. On the right hand side, again, we have a lot of numeric parameters to set up. Now, M, like many or perhaps most or perhaps even all algorithmic composition programs, makes great use of the random function. So this is one of the areas where you can randomize various settings. However, you do have a lot of control over the randomization, so you can determine just exactly how random it is. So you can apply just a little bit of randomness if that's what you want. This is the MIDI assignments page where you set the MIDI input and output channels. You select the part, which is the music part, and the device. There's a lot of flexibility, and it's very well specified for a MIDI program, particularly from that time. So this is the layout across the main screen. Again, I'll just apologize for the low resolution, but you can see the patterns in the top left. The cyclic options are in the center. MIDI runs along the bottom. There are a lot of variables you can mess with on the bottom left hand side. Now, as I said, the program was designed to be performed, so you can take snapshots of settings. There are also slideshows you can create and save and play back. Now, I used a lot of these functions in creating the performances that you will hear in a moment, but I will freely admit that I didn't get anywhere near plumbing the depths of this program during the time that I spent with it. So, I'll start with a piece called Cosmic Dance. And as you can probably tell from the title, this was during my New Age phase, and the aim here was to produce a piece of music which gently and slowly evolved over time. And if you listen to the entire piece, you will hear the sections where they slowly change from one into another. So one of the main takeaways from this, I think, is that yes, it can produce melodic pieces. This has always been one of the question marks over computer compositions and algorithmic based compositions. So I'll play a very short extract from the piece where the music changes from one section to another, so you can see how that has evolved. Now this next piece, it's called Angles. At the time I had been visiting an electro music festival. There were performances of all sorts of electro music, including pieces that we might regard as avant-garde, perhaps not totally within a recognised Western scale. So yes, I took my inspiration from this and tried to produce a piece of avant-garde music. Now I'm interested in all sorts of music. One of the things which I do find fascinating is when a composer writes a series of lines or squares or graphical symbols and gives them to a performer, and the performer needs to interpret them. Now the result is not necessarily as random as it might at first appear, although to our Western ears, which are used to tunes and melodies and rhythm and so on, it might seem a little bit discordant. And at the time, certainly, it was not uncommon for composers to specify a strange combination of instruments. So there might be a cello, a xylophone, and a watering can, for example, pushing the boundaries of what we accept and recognise as music. Anyway, that's the background. So this is a piece for three, it may be four instruments. I can't actually remember without going back and listening to it again, which I will do, of course, but they are not what you might consider to be a typical instrument ensemble. Now the piece is only short, it's 6 minutes long. If you listen to it in its entirety, which I would really appreciate your opinion on it, if you do listen to it, 6 minutes long, it may seem longer. Fair warning. But I will play a little extract for you where you can hear the different instruments. Now all the pieces on Angles and Cosmic Dance were recorded on the ubiquitous SY77. Now these final three pieces are interesting as well, I think, for a couple of other reasons. First of all, they were not on my Rediscovered tapes. I rediscovered them on a backup of a backup of a backup that I had backed up in the late 1980s. Obviously, when I upgraded my computer systems, I tend to hang on to the files. So this was stored way back in some obscure archive, but I thought I would do a search and see if I could find anything, and I did, and I found these three programs. However, they are not audio versions, they are MIDI versions, because this is the data that M used. But more than that, they also appear to be in general MIDI file format. Now if you have a standard general MIDI file, you should be able to play it on Windows Media Player, and it should play with various instrumental sounds. Now there was of course the temptation to load these into my DAW and to orchestrate them or to arrange them to produce better sounds, but I thought, no, look, the whole point of this is what I was doing in the late 80s and 90s, and this is the music as I produced it and as it probably sounded. I have to say, why these pieces are in general MIDI file format, I really don't know, because I would have used almost certainly the Yamaha SY77 for the sounds. But there you go. Now I don't seem to come across general MIDI very much these days. If you're wondering what it was, I'll try to be brief, but when MIDI was developed, there was a passion for music in MIDI file format, and people were loading these MIDI files into digital pianos and workstations and so on, and just trying to play the files. Now obviously each developer used different sounds for each music track. So a line which was supposed to be played up on flute could end up being played on tuba or a helicopter sound. So general MIDI was developed, which was simply a standard, saying that program 1 was, I'm pretty sure that was a piano. I can't remember what all the other numbers were for, but each program number had an assigned instrument. So different manufacturers could produce a general MIDI box or sound set, and the idea was that a general MIDI file would sound roughly the same on all manufacturers' general MIDI equipment. Of course, some manufacturers' general MIDI sounded better than others, and not wanting to be accused of making so-so sounds, Roland developed an extended version called GS, I think, which had a better selection of sounds, and Yamaha produced an XG version, which was certainly my preferred option. And later on in the 90s, when I was actually writing pieces of music for a piece of game software which had to use general MIDI, I used the XG standard as the basis. So that's a very quick look at general MIDI. But the point is, if you play this through Windows Media Player, it does not have the best selection of general MIDI sounds in the world. And that is the audio version that you're going to hear. Now, on a slightly technical note, in case you go off and try to play MIDI files on Windows Media Player, I do know that 1 or 2 people have had problems getting Windows Media Player to play general MIDI files. And I think there's a little setup thing that you have to do. I'm just mentioning that in case you try it and it doesn't work. But if you Google it, you will find solutions for setting up Windows Media Player to play general MIDI files. Now, the other thing I'd like to say is that if you were around in the early days of the PC, you may recall that the file names had an 8-character limit. So you had to be fairly creative when you were coming up with the names. So the Atari ST, which these were recorded on, also had the same 8-character file name limitation. So I had to be creative with the names. So 2 of the pieces, I have a good idea what I was trying to get at. The 3rd piece, I'm not so sure, but we'll discuss that in a second. So this is the first piece, and it's simply called Durge, although I have been creative with the spelling. And when M produced it, I got a picture of a lonely piper standing on a windswept hill, playing the pipes and lamenting the recent death of his laird. Now, the second piece is called Dance Mass, and I was quite into alternative spellings, as you can see. Now, my recollection of this piece, and we are going back way over 30 years for this, is that I thought it suggested a medieval dance of some sort. And I shall just throw in a little bit of colour here. For some reason, this brought to mind the movie The Masque of the Red Death, which was based on a short story by Edgar Allan Poe, and it was made into a movie in the mid-1960s by Roger Corman, starring Vincent Price, who was a great actor and appeared in a lot of these type of horror movies at the time. Also Hazel Court, who was also, I think, a horror movie favourite, and it also starred the lovely Jane Asher in what was probably one of her early acting roles. So that's the best explanation of why I call this Dance Mass. I'm sure I would have called it Mask if there'd been enough letters. And you may think it doesn't sound anything at all like a medieval dance, which is totally fine. And you feel free to leave a better suggestion if you have one. And here's a little extract from that. and the final piece is called Celeb. Now I confess I am at a total loss to recall what I meant by celeb. I doubt it was short for celebrity, possibly celebration. Can you link celebration with this? I'm not sure. But since I don't have a better name, that is the one I'm going with, and that's the one that you'll find in the link below. Now it sounds like a string trio or maybe a quartet occasionally, or quite what that might have to do with celebration, I'm not totally sure. I have no idea what my state of mind was like 30 odd years ago. Anyway, here is a short extract from that. So there you go. You can listen to each piece individually in its entirety using the links down below, and I would be particularly interested to know what you think of them. And have you explored computer-based composition before, or algorithmic compositions? And what were your results? It's a fascinating field. Let me know. Leave a comment. You can leave it here or in the comment field of the individual videos. Now, as always, I've put images to the pieces. I particularly like the Cosmic Dance videos. That will immediately give away my two favourite genres. Angles was more difficult as it didn't have a particular theme. It is more an abstract piece, so I took a series of abstract images and created a slideshow montage of those. And just because I could, halfway through the piece I actually reversed the order of the images, so I took this part of the video and flipped it back to front. I mentioned that because part of me just wanted to give it this a little bit of symmetry, so the symmetry is in the images, even if you don't find a lot of symmetry in the music. So if you like this video and the extracts and you find it interesting and hopefully helpful and encouraging, then please consider subscribing and ring the bell so you get informed of new videos when I release them, and also hit the big thumb. It's there, it just wants to be hit. As always, I do appreciate you watching this very, very much indeed. That's why I put the videos up here in the hope that someone's going to watch them and enjoy them. So thank you very much indeed. And that's it for this one. I will see you again in the next video.